The city of New York was buzzing again, not because of another mayoral speech or a political scandal from City Hall, but because of one man, Zohran Mamdani. The Queen's Assembly man, known for his unapologetic voice and fiery passion, had once again taken the stage. This time his words were directed at Carrie Lane, a conservative commentator who had made a career out of mocking progressives like him. Their confrontation wasn't just another TV debate. It felt like a battleground between two different versions of America. The tension started days before the broadcast. Lane had accused Mamdani of destroying New York values with his socialist ideals, claiming he was more interested in revolution than reality. Mamdani never wanted to stay silent, fired back on social media, writing, "If fighting for housing, healthcare, and justice is destroying values, then maybe it's time we rebuild this city from the ground up." That post went viral. Within hours, every major network wanted them both live, face to face. When the lights went on, you could almost feel the electricity in the air. Carrie Lane sat stiffly in her chair, smirking, dressed in her signature blazer. Mamdani leaned slightly forward, his eyes locked on hers, not with anger, but with a calm determination that made the audience lean closer. The host barely got through the introductions before Lane started her attack. "Mr. Mamdani," she said sharply, "your ideas might sound noble, but they destroy hardworking Americans. You push for free housing, yet you never explain who pays for it. You speak of justice, but your kind of justice looks a lot like chaos." Mamdani didn't blink. "Chaos," he repeated, his voice even. "Carrie, what's truly chaotic is a city where a billionaire owns 5 apartments while a mother and child sleep in a subway station." The audience stirred. Lane smiled tightly. "That's emotional manipulation, not economics," she said. "You think shouting about inequality fixes it? It doesn't. People need Yusashtar, not slogans. And how do you expect them to work?" Mamdani shot back, "when they can't even afford to live in the city that exploits their labor?" For a moment, Lane froze, her expression faltering. Mamdani pressed on, his words flowing like fire. "You defend a system that rewards greed and punishes honesty. You talk about jobs, but you forget dignity. You talk about freedom, but only for those who can't afford it." The studio fell silent except for the hum of the lights overhead. Amuhted. Even the host seemed unsure whether to interrupt. Mamdani's voice grew quieter but stronger. "We can't keep pretending this city belongs to everyone when it's built for a few." The silence broke into applause from the audience, something rare for a live debate. Lane's smirk returned, though it looked more forced now. "So what's your grand plan, Mr. Revolutionary?" she sneered. "Nationalize everything? Turn New York into a Havana?" Mamdani smiled for the first time. "No," he said. "I just want to turn it into a place where no one's humanity is negotiable." That line hit like thunder. Social media exploded minutes after. Clips of the exchange flooded TikTok, YouTube, and Twitter. Some called him radical. Others called him brave. But one thing was clear. Mamdani had just changed the tone of political debate in America. And as the cameras cut to commercial, you could see it in his eyes. This was only the beginning of something much bigger. By the next morning, the internet was on fire. News anchors couldn't stop replaying the clip of Zohran Mamdani's takedown of Carrie Lane. On social media, people were calling it the moment that shook New York politics. But with fame comes fury. Conservative outlets labeled him dangerous, radical, even un-American. Lane, sensing an opportunity to regain control of the narrative, went on a media blitz. She appeared on every major network, painting Mamdani as an extremist who wants to dismantle capitalism and punish success. She claimed that his vision for New York would turn it into a socialist wasteland. It was a calculated move, make him look like an outsider, even in his own city. Yet Mamdani didn't flinch. Instead of retreating, he doubled down. He went live on Instagram that night, speaking directly to thousands of viewers. "They want you to believe justice is a threat," he said, his tone calm but unshakably confident. "But the real threat is a system that decides who deserves to live and who doesn't. The comment section flooded with support. Teachers, nurses, delivery workers, even small business owners. Finally, someone saying what we live through every day, one wrote. But not everyone was cheering. Behind the scenes, political insiders were getting nervous. Anonymous donors began pressuring local party leaders to distance themselves from Mamdani. Leaked emails later revealed one major donor warning. If he keeps talking like this, we'll lose control of the city. Meanwhile, Carrie Lane wasn't done. She organized a town hall on freedom, inviting Mamdani to attend. The poster for the event read, "Freedom versus Control the Future of New York." It was a trap, but Mamdani accepted. The night of the event, the hall was packed. Cameras everywhere. Lane began with her trademark confidence. "We are here to defend the freedom that built this country," she said, gesturing dramatically. A freedom people like Zoran Mamdani would gladly trade for government control. The crowd cheered, but Mamdani didn't react. When it was his turn, he walked to the microphone slowly, hands in his pockets. He looked around the room and began softly. "Freedom," he said, "isn't the privilege to ignore another person's pain. It's the responsibility to make sure no one is crushed under the weight of your comfort." The room went silent. Lane tried to interrupt, but Mamdani raised his hand slightly, not in arrogance, but in conviction. "When you say you love freedom," he continued, "do you mean the freedom to profit from someone else's struggle? The freedom to turn away from suffering and call it success?" A murmur spread through the audience. Even some of Lane's supporters seemed uneasy. She jumped in, her voice sharper now. "You're twisting ideals, Zoran. Freedom isn't about guilt. It's about opportunity." "Then where is that opportunity?" Mamdani asked. "Because from Harlem to the Bronx, from Jackson Heights to Queensbridge, people are still waiting for it." The words cut through the hall like glass. Lane forced a laugh. "You love drama, don't you? You make everything sound poetic. But politics isn't poetry." Mamdani smiled faintly. "Maybe it should be." He said. "Maybe politics needs more humanity and less performance." The audience erupted in applause. Lane's face hardened. She had underestimated him again. That night, headlines read, "Mamdani outsmarts Lane in live debate, again." His message was spreading faster than anyone could contain. And though his opponents worked to silence him, Zoran Mamdani had become something bigger than a politician. He was now a symbol of defiance. But deep down, he knew what was coming next. When you challenge power this directly, power doesn't just argue back, it fights back. The city didn't sleep after that debate. Every corner of New York seemed to buzz with Zoran Mamdani's name. Taxi drivers played clips of his speech on the radio. College students quoted him on campus walls. But behind the curtain, the pushback grew darker. Political consultants whispered that the mayor's office had had enough. Eric Adams, known for his control and image, was watching the rise of Mamdani with visible irritation. During a closed-door meeting, one aide reportedly said, "He's turning into a problem we can't ignore." Adams leaned back and replied coldly, "Then it's time to remind him who runs this city." The very next week, a wave of negative stories hit the media. Anonymous sources claimed Mamdani mishandled campaign funds and had ties to radical groups. None of it was true, but truth was never the point. The goal was simple: discredit, isolate, and silence. Yet the attempt backfired spectacularly. When journalists asked for evidence, none was provided. Instead, the smear campaign only made Mamdani more popular. People saw through it, and his support doubled. Still, the pressure was immense. Death threats filled his inbox. Protesters began showing up outside his office, waving signs that said, "Go back to Africa," and "Socialism kills." But Mamdani never stopped showing up. He continued meeting with workers, immigrants, and activists, refusing to be intimidated. "They can't cancel the truth," he said during one gathering in Queens. "They can only prove how afraid they are of it." Meanwhile, Eric Adams decided to confront him publicly. At a press event about policing budgets, Mamdani stood in the crowd and asked a question no one expected. "Mr. Mayor, how do you justify cutting social housing while increasing police funding?" The air went heavy. Cameras turned. Adams smirked and replied, Councilman Mamdani doesn't understand leadership. Governing isn't about utopian fantasies. It's about keeping people safe. Mamdani didn't back down. Safe for who? He asked quietly. Because it's not safe to be poor in this city. It's not safe to be homeless. It's not safe to be forgotten. Adams waved him off, but the damage was done. The clip went viral overnight. Millions watched as Mamdani calmly dismantled the mayor's rhetoric in under a minute. Comments poured in. Finally, someone speaking truth to power. He said what we all feel. Still, the establishment moved fast. A week later, the city council proposed an ethics investigation into Mamdani's finances. It was a transparent attempt to weaken him, but it worked, for a moment. Some of his allies began distancing themselves. Donations slowed. Journalists started calling him controversial. For the first time, Mamdani looked tired, not defeated, but human. One night, while walking home, he passed a mural of Malcolm X. Underneath it were the words, "If you're not careful, the newspapers will have you hating the people who are being oppressed." He stopped, stared, and smiled faintly. The next morning, he held a press conference. The room was packed with reporters expecting apologies, denials, or damage control. Instead, he began with something no one saw coming. "They say I'm too radical," he said. Maybe they're right. Because it is radical to believe no child should sleep hungry in the richest city on earth. It is radical to demand that power serve people, not profit. His voice rose slightly, each word deliberate. And if that makes me an enemy to corruption, so be it. I'll wear that title proudly. The crowd went silent for a moment, then erupted in applause. Cameras flashed. For the first time, even some of his critics hesitated. They had tried to bury him, but all they did was plant him deeper into the hearts of the people. Still, the battle was far from over. Eric Adams, now publicly humiliated, wasn't done. He was about to use every lever of power at his disposal. What came next would test Mamdani more than any speech, any smear, any debate. Because now it wasn't just about politics, it was survival. The morning after his defiant press conference, Zoran Mamdani woke up to the sound of sirens outside his apartment window. 2 unmarked police cars were parked by the curb. Not unusual for New York, except this time, they weren't there for anyone else. A subpoena had been filed against him, alleging financial irregularities and misuse of public funds. The same baseless accusations that had circulated online days earlier now carried the weight of an official investigation. It was a clear move by Eric Adams' administration. They wanted to break him publicly, to drain his energy through endless legal battles. But Mamdani, instead of panicking, did something unexpected. He called a press conference again. Cameras crowded the small community youth center in Astoria. When he walked in, he wasn't wearing his usual tailored suit. Instead, he appeared in a simple shirt, sleeves rolled up, looking more like an organizer than a politician. "They think fear will silence me," he began. "They think power gives them the right to rewrite truth. But let me remind them, New York belongs to its people, not to the ones sitting in marble offices." His tone wasn't angry, it was controlled, sharp, almost surgical. "If standing up for tenants makes me corrupt, then so be it. If fighting for workers makes me dangerous, then maybe danger is exactly what this city needs." The crowd erupted, cheering his name. Even journalists who once called him controversial began to shift their tone. That clip traveled across every platform, TikTok, Twitter, YouTube, turning him into a symbol of resistance. But while public support grew, behind the scenes, the pressure intensified. Donors withdrew funding. Party insiders began whispering about disciplinary actions. Eric Adams called an emergency meeting with senior advisors. "He's turning this city into his stage," Adams said, slamming his fist on the table. "We can't let him control the narrative." One aide suggested a televised debate. Discredit him in real time. Adams smirked. "Perfect. Let's end this once and for all." The invitation came 2 days later, a live debate between Mayor Eric Adams and Councilman Zoran Mamdani, broadcast nationwide. Many assumed Mamdani wouldn't dare accept it. Instead, he tweeted one sentence, "I'll be there." The night of the debate, tension gripped the city. Bars, cafes, and dorm rooms tuned in. Even cab drivers pulled over to watch. When the camera lights came on, Adams wore his confident smile, the kind politicians spend years practicing. Mamdani looked calm, but there was something in his eyes, an intensity that made even his opponents nervous. The moderator began with an easy question about the city's economic recovery. Adams answered with polished talking points about progress, stability, and public safety. Then it was Mamdani's turn. You talk about progress, he said slowly. But progress for who? You talk about safety, but whose safety? The safety of the rich developer whose rent keeps rising, or the single mother working 2 jobs who can't afford an apartment anymore? Adams interrupted. You have no idea what it takes to run this city. Mamdani didn't flinch. No, he said, I have every idea. It takes courage, and maybe that's why you're so afraid of it. The audience gasped. Adams's face stiffened. You're a radical, he snapped. You want to dismantle everything that keeps this city standing. Mamdani leaned forward, his voice calm but cutting. No, Mr. Mayor. I want to rebuild what your system destroyed. The moderator tried to interject, but the energy in the room had shifted. Adams's practiced confidence cracked. He began rambling about budgets and bureaucracies, while Mamdani stood still, letting silence do the work. The more Adams spoke, the smaller he looked. By the end of the debate, even the networks couldn't spin it. Headlines appeared within hours. Mamdani outshines Adams in brutal debate. A new voice for New York. The People's Councilman takes the stage. Online, viewers flooded the comment sections, some emotional, others angry, but all captivated. He said what no one else would. Finally, someone with a backbone. Adams looked like he was fighting a mirror and losing. Yet, beneath the applause and headlines, Mamdani knew the fight was far from over. Power doesn't surrender easily, and when it feels threatened, it strikes harder. What neither he nor anyone else expected was how far Eric Adams would go next. Because the next move would cross every line and test whether the truth could still survive in a city built on silence. The morning after the debate, New York woke up divided. Half the city hailed Zoran Mamdani as a hero who spoke truth to power, while the other half, fueled by headlines planted by the mayor's office, called him a dangerous extremist. Front pages read, Councilman under investigation after explosive debate. Is Mamdani too radical for New York? The smear campaign was in full swing. Anonymous sources leaked fake documents, and talk shows debated whether Mamdani's rise was manufactured. But none of that mattered anymore, because something had changed. For the first time, people who had never cared about politics began marching, holding signs that read, We are Zoran. It wasn't a campaign, it was a movement. Inside City Hall, panic spread. Eric Adams watched from his office as footage of massive crowds flooded social media. Aides suggested calming the fire with a public statement. If we engage, we legitimize him, Adams said, pacing. If we ignore him, he becomes unstoppable. That night, he chose a third option. Behind closed doors, a document was drafted, one that would accuse Mamdani of inciting civil unrest. It was meant to silence him permanently. The next morning, police arrived at his district office with an arrest warrant. Cameras were already waiting. But when they entered, they found Mamdani standing in the middle of the room, surrounded by supporters. He didn't resist. He raised his hands, smiled slightly, and said, If speaking for justice is a crime, then I am guilty. The image went viral within minutes. By evening, protests erupted across all 5 boroughs. People flooded the streets, chanting his name, demanding his release. Even those who disagreed with his politics began questioning the mayor's motives. You can jail a man, one sign read, but you can't arrest the truth. Under immense pressure, Adams held a late-night press conference. He looked exhausted, defensive. This city cannot be held hostage by chaos, he said. But the crowd outside City Hall was louder than his microphone. Chants echoed through the night. Free Mamdani! Power to the people! Inside his holding cell, Zoran sat silently, listening to the sound of distant voices. An officer leaned over and whispered, They're all out there for you, man. You started something. Mamdani didn't respond. He just smiled faintly and closed his eyes. Hours later, the charges were dropped. The official statement said lack of evidence, but everyone knew what had happened. New York had chosen its side. When Mamdani walked out of the precinct, thousands were waiting. The crowd parted as he stepped forward,